Let's talk about stories. 3 main points about stories. We all have stories.
Yeah.
Number 2 is, do we take the time to hear other people's story? And the third thing is, are we willing to become part of people's stories? So, I don't know. We all have stories.
I do. Whether it's individually or as a couple or as our family.
As our family. And, that's the biggest thing here at Phil Hyman Portraits, here at the Portrait Studio. Everyone that walks through the door, they're having a portrait done for a reason.
And I always tell our clients, you shouldn't have a picture. To me, something that doesn't have a story behind it is just a picture. But something that has a meaningful story behind it is captured as a portrait that's lasting, that's an heirloom piece. So we always want to hear people's stories because that's what gives it that emotional attachment. It just does.
And that's the thing about, if you look at everything in people's life, there's a story wrapped around it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a really positive, it's a great story, but then sometimes it's a tragic story.
Yeah.
Or there's a lot of pain there.
But we learn by those stories. We grow by those stories, whether they're good or bad. That's who helps us become who we are.
So what is one of the stories that really stands out to you from a client that we photographed?
Well, we have a client that is a longtime client that she came to us. Their kids are a teenager, almost teenager. We photograph them every year. But her story was, she came to us when she was pregnant and she has a disability and they've become super good friends of ours. So I've got to hear this story. I've seen their kids grow up and everything. But their main story was, when they came to us, they wanted a pregnancy portrait done because she was told long time ago, and she's heard it all her life, that she wasn't ever going to be able to be pregnant. She wasn't ever going to be able to carry a child full term. It was just out of her cards, so to say. And she became pregnant. She went full term. Yes, she had a C-section because of the type of disability she had, but her babies are perfect. They are completely healthy. They are awesome, smart, into all kinds of stuff. Now, Gabe is 16.
Yep.
Karis is 11, 12, and they're super kids. She not only had one child, she had 2 children. And for us to be a part of their story and be able to create beautiful portraits for this family and hear their story time and time again, it just is awesome for us to be a part of that and be able to create that. So that's one out of a ton of stories that we hear all the time
hundreds.
And that we're a part of.
Yeah.
I just think that's something. What's a story that you remember?
A story that stands out to me is Rita. Back when we did weddings, we photographed her daughter's wedding. Her and my dad had known each other for years. And we're like, hey, you really need to get a portrait of you and your grandkids. You and your husband and grandkids. Yeah, well, it was always a time. So I remember, basically, you called her up.
We're doing a project.
We're doing a project. You got to come in, and you and Steve have
You can't
to
say
do
no.
this. And so she was like, okay. She found a time. It was in the summer. There was a certain week. She always kept all her grandkids, and they had like camp.
Yep.
And so she came in. We photographed them. That was like in July.
Yeah.
And then in September, just like 6-8 weeks later, her husband passed away.
Yeah.
Unexpectedly. And she had picked her book up. It was a book, and she picked her portrait up. And to this day, she talks about how much that means to her. And to me, it's something special to be a part.
To share in that moment with them.
Share that moment with them and play that small part in their story.
It may be small, but it's huge in their minds.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
Not only in their minds, in their hearts.
In their hearts. Yeah. But we hear these stories all the time. And we're able to be a part of those stories a lot of times.
Yeah.
I mean, there again, whether it's good or bad, we get to be a part of it. And the only way that you can be a part of it is to ask them about their story. Why is this important to you? Why is this moment so important to you? That sort of deal. I remember a couple came in not too long ago, it was a year ago, and I walked up front and greeted them, and this wife, she intended on having her entire family in this session, and they had to cancel that part. So she said, "It's just me and my husband." And I walked up front, and the husband wouldn't even hardly speak to me. He was on his phone. So I walked back to the back, and the wife was almost embarrassed that he wouldn't even speak. And I walked back and looked at Alex. I said, "It's going to be a doozy. I'm going to need you." And so we went through the session, found out it was their 50th wedding anniversary, and we had almost done the entire session, and Alex stopped the session. It was like 10 minutes into the session. He stopped the session, pulled the camera aside, and he looked at the husband and asked him one simple question: "What's the greatest thing you've ever done in your life?" And that husband broke down right then and said, "I married this woman right here." And that was it. That was their story. And he was able to pull it out of that husband to where it was an emotional attachment that day.
Yeah.
And that was their story. And sometimes it takes a special person to pull it out of them because they're so guarded.
But see, I remember that, and from that point on, he
was a totally different person. Exactly, because he was talking about the person he loves the most. And sometimes it's not talking about yourself, it's talking about the people you love the most is what creates that attachment. And for us to be able to be a part of that experience and see something transform into something else, like his personality transform into something so warming, that's rewarding to me, is to be able to see that. We see it in our kids. They're busy, but they have stories too. And to be able to see what they're passionate about, what they love, is kind of cool to see, because then you see a glimpse of how they're going to be when they become adults.
So as parents, how should we be intentional about hearing our children's story and being a part of their story? Because to me, again, it goes back to when you're a part of your children's story in a healthy way, that's your legacy becomes their story.
I think it takes a lot of asking questions, but not being so in depth that they get bored. Because kids get bored. Their attention span is so small. But I think it's asking, like, we've never babied our kids. I mean, we've protected our kids, but we've never talked to them like they were babies. Yeah. They're human beings. They have brains of their own. I think they can answer specific questions depending on what age they are. So I think we've been really good with asking questions, what their passions are. And it changes. Kids are fickle. They change constantly, but it's embedding that into them. Like, I love the question that you ask our kids all the time. It's not that, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you ask them? Well, that gets them really thinking.
No, actually, this came from you.
Oh,
No, this came from you. You read it somewhere and you're like, that's so cool. I take it and run with it.
Yeah.
I don't ask the kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? I ask them, what problem do you want to solve?
So to me, questions like that really gets them thinking, because it's not necessarily always about the profession that they want to do. It's how are you going to help create your little world that surrounds you to help the people around you. I mean, yes, our profession is portrait photographers. We capture certain moments in people's lives, but how are we helping that family to make it an easier process, a memorable process, an emotional connection to that portrait, to where it's a lasting portrait, not just picture.
Right.
And a lot of times is pulling emotion out of people, psychology, but it's real, it's not fake. It's having those conversations with people or your children that makes them think a little bit harder on what their passions are. And then it's walking with our kids along the way to give them advice on what's going to be best to get to those passions. That's kind of hard, but it's necessary.
But I go back to story is taking the time to hear other people's story, taking the time to be a part of their story when they invite us in to their story. I'm going to get on a soapbox here, and then I'll let you I'll let you clean up the aftermath.
Oh boy.
But my soapbox here is social media. We all love it. We're all on it. But social media and cell phones, it is destroying people's story. It is destroying kids, teenagers. It's destroying their story because they're in front of the screen. They're on social media. Interesting thing, just yesterday morning, we were talking about social media, and our son, he said he does have an Instagram account, and we do monitor that. But he said, I can't be on Instagram and I can't scroll. He said within 5 minutes of scrolling, he said you just see a super negative post or negative comments. And I mean, in some kids, they get locked in on that. And it destroys their story. It destroys
who they're becoming. And I mean, we always say social media is the highlight reels of everybody. It creates envy. It creates this, I've got to be a certain way. Things like that. As teenagers, we was affected by that kind of stuff, but we was affected in kind of a different way. We saw it on television, then we'd have to see it in person. Whereas now, it comes to your home and you're inundated by it, and you invite that in on a daily, hourly, minute basis. Our kids are amplified by that. So I do agree, even though that's your soapbox, but I do agree that social media can destroy. But as parents, we need to constantly either monitor that or, to me, be the sound box for our kids as far as making sure that what they're seeing and hearing is real or not real. We need to make sure that we guide them in that way constantly, and it's got to be a reassurance because other kids are mean. I don't care if it's in person or on social media or texting, they're all mean at a certain age, and they're going through their own struggles as kids too. And I think for the most part, kids don't mean to be mean, but they are mean, and some kids take it to heart. And that's when we have to make sure as parents that we're walking alongside them, that we're not ignoring that, because we need to make sure that they're not changing their stories because they're trying to impress somebody else.
Well, that leads me to a thought, and I think this question, I've heard Michael Hyatt say it, and it works for business, it works for personal, it works for family. What story are we telling ourselves? And because that, your internal dialogue, the story that you're telling yourself, I mean, it's everything.
Well, I mean, if you tell it enough, it becomes real
right.
for you. And is it positive or is it negative? These are the things that you tell yourself constantly. If you tell yourself, I can never do that, I can never do that, over and over and over, you eventually say, no, you really can't do that. So these are the things that we have to be aware of, even as adults. What are we telling ourselves?
And that, going back to goals and setting goals, those are stories of what we want to obtain. So why do we fail at goals? Because they're our stories, but why do we stop telling those stories after a week, after 2 weeks, after a month, after 2 months? Why do we stop telling those stories?
I think for me is it's easy for me to stop something if I have a hiccup. So I'm go to what everybody goes to, weight loss. I have this big old plan to go to the gym, on a consistent basis and eat healthy and all that kind of stuff. I'll do it for a while and then I have a hiccup. And the hiccup is a distraction. I'm like, I'm going to the gym Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then all of a sudden something in our schedule shifts it and I can't go to the gym. And then I'm like, then I give up. And if it happens enough and I tell myself, oh, I'm too busy, My schedule won't allow it. It becomes reality. And then I'm just like, I never go to the gym because I'm too busy and my schedule won't allow it. So I think these are the things that we have to be aware of so that we go back to, why is it that I want to lose weight? Why is it that I want to live a healthy lifestyle? What is the end result? Not hiccups along the way, I guess. That's the only thing that I can kind of make it real.
Kind of wrapping up this conversation, let me ask you a question. What one piece of advice would you give on someone's story, the story they're telling themselves?
I think if you're setting a goal like we set our goals for 3 years from now or whatever, I think you have to constantly remind yourself, what is the end result? How are you going to achieve that? And are you hearing reality versus not reality? Are you believing in yourself of what is real? Or are you listening to others not give you reality, so to say? And if you're listening to somebody's story, you need to really listen and digest. And if they allow you to be a part of that, be a part of it, not just hear it. Because there again, there's a difference between hearing and really listening and being a part. Because everybody has a story and everybody's story is unique.
Yeah, I think for me, what I would say, the one piece of story that's important is make sure we're open to being a part of other story and being open to someone wanting to be a part of our story. And, always keep the story that you're telling yourself, keep it healthy. And don't be selfish with your story. I think that's probably it. Don't be selfish with your story. And don't be selfish with your time with other people's story, because you never know. You absolutely just never know the impact you will have on other people's story or the impact they will have on your story if you allow it.
It's very true. Very true.
Good conversation.
Yep.